Welcome back to the M&M podcast. Today we will be talking about some of our favorite directors, and who better to talk about film with than the certified film bro, Alex.
Thank you, Mitch. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, so I just thought today we'd only talk about a couple each because we'd like to go a bit in depth to talk about, some of our favorite movies by those directors, what makes them unique. And we'll start off with a disclaimer. We didn't include Quentin Tarantino. That's not because we don't like Tarantino. It's just because we already had an episode on him. So we wanted to discuss some other filmmakers. And I guess we could just kind of give a rundown on who we'll be talking about. We each brought two to the table. I went with Spike Lee and David Fincher. Alex, who did you pick?
I picked Spielberg and Nolan. Steven
So we've
Spielberg,
got a
Christopher Nolan.
pretty good quartet. They've combined made some of the biggest movies. Spielberg of the last 50 years. The other ones maybe like the last 20 more so. 30 to 40 for Spike Lee. But not just the biggest movies, some movies that really stood the test of time. And in Spike Lee's case, some that were very unique, and he wasn't shy to take on some sensitive subject matter, which is always great. That's what art's about.
Mhm.
But I guess we could start with David Fincher, who he's more of a modern director, like really the last 20, 25 years mostly. And so just to give a quick rundown on some of his biggest films would be Social Network, Fight Club, Seven, Zodiac, Gone Girl, Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. And then he also did a great miniseries, Mindhunter, on Netflix.
Oh, we did Mindhunter. I did not know
Yeah.
that.
I actually made a TikTok about that a couple weeks, or not a
Oh
couple
yeah.
weeks. Yeah. By the time this comes out, a while ago,
I'm gonna say
but
you're outing me. I haven't seen the TikTok.
yeah, but just about how he said that Netflix wouldn't be renewing. Like, it's the second season came out in 2019, and it's always been like seemingly there won't be a third season, and he pretty much confirmed that. Not
Mm.
because they don't want to do it, Fincher and the staff and the crew and everything, but because Netflix thinks it's too expensive. So
Mm.
that's business, I guess. It's kind of annoying, obviously, because like Netflix will just make these like garbage shows and like reality shows
Oh
because they make no money to make, right? Like they cost no money to make, and they generate a lot of clicks and
Mm.
eyeballs. And I mean, that's just the way it goes. But you'd wish they could kind of have a combination, right, of those kind of easy money makers that
Mm.
don't have a lot of substance, but then also kind of improve the dramas that they have, because
Yeah.
really
Well.
the only like really big drama they have now is like Stranger Things, you know,
Yeah.
like
Like
that's
a drama. Yeah. Because I
like
think Netflix is like a hit or miss with me. Like we'll cover this in another episode, but it's
mhm,
either you have the absolute like hidden gems of movies with
mhm,
Netflix originals, or you have just like dumpster fire. Like
yeah,
there's not a lot of in between. So no, that's
yeah.
what I find
So
anyways.
and like lots of anyone who's seen Mindhunter for the most part like really likes it, thinks it's one of the best shows at least of like the 2010s. It's just so well written. And like Fincher is probably my favorite director, I would say. I still need to
Mhm.
watch more of his movies, but just like I go through the list, if you've seen any of them or many of them, you can kind of think, oh, okay, like he really enjoys the sort of like dark storylines,
Mhm.
um, and a little bit of, I guess, kind of like the dark psychological aspect, maybe when you think of like Mindhunter, Gone Girl, Seven,
Fight Club,
even
yeah, Fight
Fight
Club
Club,
2.
even like Social Network. There's some real kind of like
Mhm.
elements of just like a lack of sort of humanity throughout, almost like
It's like a darker look on like he sees it through a darker lens, if you will, right? It's very
yeah.
like and that comes through with uh even the lighting too. They're
Mhm,
very dark movies and like
for
very
sure.
like desaturated movies as well. Like not a lot of color, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of, well, I like all sorts of movies, but just I do find with his films, I don't know, something just resonate. It is a bit dark on the darker side,
Mhm.
but it's also, I feel like, quite grounded a lot of the time.
Mhm.
And I know like another thing, because I was doing some research. I'm not a film expert, but I was doing a bit of research, and I know one of the things people mentioned when talking about him and like what makes him like such a good director, and it was his ability to cover dark subject matter but still get the performances to be quite like compelling and almost where the audience, even if it's like a bad person or someone who has a lot of flaws or whatever, to still be almost maybe not likable, but you're still kind of engaged and interested in what they're doing, as
Mhm.
opposed to if it's just like a completely evil character, people are just going to turn on them and not care, you know.
And I see that with Nolan's films a bit too. We'll get in that later, but I like how you said, yeah, darker psychological take. Like, what would you say would be your favorite go-to Fincher movies? Or when you think of Fincher, what are the movies that pop in your
I
head?
would say the movie for me would be Social Network.
Mhm.
That's probably one of my favorite movies of all time. And to me, like what I look for in movies is it's pretty much all comes down to dialogue.
Yeah.
I don't particularly care for like special effects or kind of bells and whistles, even though there's a lot of like people who enjoy that and it's very difficult. Like it's not that's not to say like there aren't great movies that do have lots of special effects
You
or
appreciate
maybe
the
they
VFX. You're just not a
yeah.
fan. Like Marvel,
Well,
we say like Mitch is not a fan of Marvel. We know that.
yeah, but like there are other like great movies that don't have a lot of dialogue, like Mad Max or something.
Mhm.
But for me, just like in general, I would say I'm someone who really enjoys just like dialogue and kind of character driven stories. And I feel like Social Network, even though it's like probably not that accurate, um,
Some liberties taken,
it's
right?
just a great movie. Like it's so well written and it's I find it like I never kind of lost interest throughout the movie. Like I was always engaged, even though there wasn't like anything that crazy that happened. Really, like it's kind of just like a business, young people backstabbing each other. Pretty straightforward, you'd imagine in the Silicon Valley, you know,
Mhm.
in the
But it's the
tech
way he
industry.
the way he portrayed it though, like you said, is like it has a darker tone and it just grips you. Like you want to
Mm-hmm.
know what's happening next because like it's the they plays on the drama very well. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, you don't need big special effects. It's dialogue and yeah, dialogue and people at each other's throats. That's all you need
Yeah,
for a
and I
good
think
drama.
there's like I've seen some things about how much like lines are in the movie and how many words per minute there are,
Oh,
and it's
really?
like one of
I
the
didn't know that.
highest like of any movie.
Oh, wow.
Um, and you think of like the performances
Hmm.
also like with Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield in particular.
Hmm.
Just really good, a very smart movie, very clever movie. And I guess like looking at his other films, I would say the one that stands out probably for most people is Fight Club,
Yep.
which I wouldn't say is my favorite. Like it's a very good movie, unique. It's based off a book actually, I
Yeah.
believe. Um,
Haven't read it yet,
but
but
but that's an iconic one, obviously, like of the 21st century. Did
hmm.
it come out in the 21st century? Or was it late
It
90s?
was a 99.
Okay,
I
so
did see this
almost.
movie a few weeks ago, actually, for the
Oh
first
yeah.
time in a while, because my little brother hasn't seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I just threw it a movie. I'm like, oh, Fight Club, I mentioned it. And he's like, I actually haven't seen that. I was like, let's watch it. So I
Mm-hmm.
watching it, you pick up more and more every time you watch a film, right? It's just that
Yeah.
you see different things. And I was talking, I don't know if it was you, Mitch, or someone else, but they said Fight Club has been like pretty overrated. I don't
I
know if it
would
was you I was talking to.
I don't think it was me, but I would kind of feel the same way
And
personally.
yeah, I agree. It's just I think the reason it has such a following and it is kind of overrated is because just the quotability. And people are like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the first rule about Fight Club? Don't talk about Fight
Yeah.
Club. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like you hear that quote all the time. And a lot of people, funny story. One of our friends, Stephanie, we had a movie night one night at college, and Al and I, who you've seen Al, he came on the podcast earlier.
Yeah.
Uh, we watched Fight Club because we're like, let's watch it. So we were watching it, and she said she's heard about it, and it's about a fight club. People are fighting like underground in a club, but she didn't realize how deep it was in terms of like the psychological like terror, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
about the movie. And I totally forgot about it because I saw it when I was probably a little too young. But Al and I looked at each other and we're like, "Oh, this is pretty intense." And she was a little uncomfortable, but it was
Yeah. And like going back to like just the idea of it being overrated, like that's my opinion. Like I feel like it no, it's a good movie for sure. It's unique. Um I definitely appreciate movies that are kind of one-offs that are hard to compare
Mhm.
um, to other films. Uh, but yeah, like I don't think it's like one of the best movies of all time, personally. And I think part of it is just like it's built like this like cult following of like
Yep.
Sigma males, like Patrick, like people who watch these like weirdos who watch American Psycho and like relate to the main
And you're like,
character,
I'm gonna
which
base
is
my personality off of him, and you're like,
yeah,
hold on.
which is like the entire point of the movie is to make fun of like the yuppies from that time in the 80s, like for American Psycho.
Yep.
And they go so over the top with everything that it's so clearly like satire, but it just goes over some people's heads. And that's kind of what happened with
Yep.
Fight Club, where like the point of Fight Club, like mainly is like consumerism, right?
Mhm.
Which is fair. I think a lot of people would agree with that. That like everything's all about like buy now, like buying more than you need, like excessiveness in all aspects of life, like kind of the American life, like the American dream, if you will.
Mhm.
I guess some people just take it at its face value as opposed to kind of thinking a little bit deeper. And that's why it's become like such a cult hit. But it's a good movie. And I don't blame like Fincher or the actors. Like that's another thing. Like Wolf of Wall Street is another great example of that, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a Scorsese movie.
Yep.
Like that's a really good movie. And it's kind of like making fun of, but also showing some of the absurdity of the like Wall Street back in the day, right? Where it was like so unregulated. You just had these people doing like crazy stuff.
Yep.
Yet people will watch it and be like, I want to be that. Like, I want to be the guy who scams people out of millions of dollars and takes their like retirement funds and everything. It's like, that's not the point of the movie, but
Yep.
it's always open to interpretation. Like, that's art, you know?
It is, and some people just take it maybe not as the director intended. So,
Mm-hmm.
and we see that with the other Fincher movies. Like you said, they take very serious routes, and like they're thinkers. Like you think
Mm-hmm.
about the messaging. They're very deep messages. Like uh Fight Club example is the one I really know. Seven. I recently saw that last year for the
Mm-hmm.
first time. I didn't get into a lot of Fincher movies until I've been exposed to his stuff, but I wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
really into it until I watched them. Like, oh, it's a Fincher movie. Like I didn't actively seek them out. But Seven was a really enjoyable movie.
Yeah.
It was dark though, but Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt as detectives together, like how can you go wrong with that method?
Yeah.
It's that formula, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. I mean, Fincher, he definitely enjoys the dark subject matter. I guess just one last point before we move on would be he's known as like a perfectionist. So,
yeah,
like actors, he's exhausting to work with because he will have like, he'll do like hundreds of takes for like a scene where you're sipping a cup of coffee and then getting
yeah,
up off a bench or something. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
something seemingly so small and insignificant. Like he's just really likes to do like a ton of takes. So for some actors, obviously they wouldn't like that. For others, they probably do like it, even though it's hard work, just because the product is going to be good in the end.
Mhm.
Um,
It's like pain now, like pain is temporary, art is forever, and some people take
and
that mentality with that.
and it's just like a different take on it. It's not to say it's right or wrong. Like other directors like spontaneity, right? Like improvisation, like Tarantino. I don't think Tarantino's doing 100 takes to get this one tiny thing perfectly right.
Mhm.
I think he prefers more when an actor's like kind of in the zone and really gets into the character and
Mhm.
then almost takes it in their own direction, right? Within the script, of course.
Yeah, and I think like well, Fincher does 25 takes minimum. That's what I've
Mm-hmm.
heard. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I've heard he does. So
Probably
with
is.
every single
Yeah.
thing, and the funny things with Fight Club, again at the end of the film when Ed Norton was like being tossed down the stairs,
Mm-hmm.
right there. Do you remember that shot where he's like going down and rolling down like 3 flights of stairs?
Yep.
Fincher did I think 30 takes of that, and he took the first one.
Yeah.
So imagine being the stunt double, getting
Mm-hmm.
tossed downstairs for like all afternoon, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I would take the first take. That one was good. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like
that's
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 that's nuts.
that's pretty crazy. And then let's get to your first director, Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. So Nolan, I've realized he hasn't actually made that many movies compared to the other directors we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from what I've seen most of his films, but the ones that I'll mention are Memento, Insomnia, the Batman trilogy, Transcendence. Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet, and his new one, Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I'm
And that
looking
one's
forward
coming
to
out.
that one. That has a
Yeah.
really good cast.
Oh, that's a stat cast. But I think like the first one I really saw by him, actually the first one I saw was Inception. And it was just a mind-bending, quite literally, like film. And
Mhm.
he's Nolan's known for just the huge concepts, like huge concept, and sometimes you get lost in it. Like I know Tenant, and Mitch, you and I saw Tenant together. I remember
Yeah,
that.
we
That
did
was that
that, and
was
that
like,
was like right when they reopened in COVID. Like,
oh, we
so
got
there was like
yeah.
hardly anyone there. I remember.
Yeah, I remember we walked
That
in.
was
There
the
was like
first.
a few people.
That was the first time I'd gone to a movie in so long because I was like 2021 or even 2020 in the summer. I don't remember,
That was
but
I remember it was 2020 in August, I believe. That was like the
something
end of
like
August.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so and I remember watching because there was like no good movies coming out then because all the studios
Mm,
pushed them back, right? Which is
yeah.
understandable. Like I know Top Gun got pushed back a lot because of that.
Mm,
Because you wanted it to be for a time when people could all go and see it, when everything was cool.
mm,
And so seeing Tenet was nice because I hadn't seen a movie in so long. And we don't need to spend too much time on Tenet, but I didn't really care for the movie. It was
yeah.
the classic Nolan because he loves to come up with these like huge concepts
Mm,
where it's borderline sci-fi, but it's not sci-fi. But
no.
it's just like the concepts are so out there and abstract, and he expects the audience to understand it. But on that one, I don't even think he understood it. Like I don't think there was much to understand other than it was like just kind of a bad James Bond movie, you know?
I think he just got really messed up one night and he wrote it down and woke up the next day and tried to like say, "Oh, I had this idea." He like was 90% there, but
Yeah.
he missed that last part that made it click. Because I don't know, like for me, I in terms of action, yeah, it was enjoyable, fun action movie. But with the
Mm-hmm.
whole concept, I think he got too bogged down with that, and he had so much exposition that just told you stuff at the beginning of the movie. Like we
Yeah.
won't spend too long on this, but it just I felt he got lost in his world building.
He
But he
got
does
lost in the sauce.
get lost in the sauce, and you know what? You can't do that as a director. You got to stay focused. So I found those high concepts though, like Inception and Interstellar, especially. That was a great movie. Those That's when it was like execution met the concept well,
Mm-hmm.
and Batman trilogy, of course, we talked about it. That
Mm-hmm.
was like he has a very like very realistic take on films. That's what I say. Like Fincher is very dark psychological. He's
Mm-hmm.
very grounded, realistic,
And
as
I
much
feel
as
like
he
with
can.
Nolan, it's almost like a paradox, like Tenet,
Mhm.
where he comes up with these like just kind of bizarre ideas and unrealistic concepts, but the way he makes the film is so that it's very realistic,
That's what I
if
meant to
that
say. Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Like
no, yeah,
Inception,
yeah.
not happening, but he doesn't make it where they're like floating around in outer space in like goofy suits or something. It seems more like a spy movie or like
Mhm.
a just like kind of a thriller type movie.
Mhm.
Same with Tenet. Like there was some bizarre like I think we've done enough Tenet.
You've
Here
done 10.
here's
Yeah,
what I'll do. I'll give credit though. I did think the opening scene was great. It was
yeah.
just kind of like an
Mhm.
action scene where there's like some SWAT team converging on some sort of like political, like the some sort of like political conference or whatever.
Mhm.
And I just remember thinking like, oh, this will be a good movie like that. This
Mhm.
was a great scene, and then it was all downhill from there. But
Yeah,
let's get to the good. Let's get to the good with Nolan.
yeah.
I haven't seen a ton of his films. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan of Nolan, but that's just compared to other
Mhm.
directors who I consider like the best of the best, right? Like I would still take Christopher Nolan over most most directors, obviously.
Mhm.
And it is cool. Like I think with all these directors, we keep mentioning it, but they kind of all have their own style. Maybe other than Spielberg. Not that he doesn't have his own style, but it's just he's made so many films, such a variety that it's a bit more difficult to pinpoint certain things. He's kind of the blockbuster maker,
Mhm.
like the giant movie maker. Um, and we'll get to him obviously at the end. But the three obviously that I've seen the most would be the Batman trilogy.
Mhm.
And we're not going to do a Batman part two episode, but I do think it kind of shows his filmmaking where particularly The Dark Knight, I would say that's his best film out of the
Mhm.
ones I've seen personally.
I may say that one and Inception for me. Those are the two.
And I think that shows his skill as a director, where because that's a difficult job. Making a Batman movie, any comic book movie, but particularly Batman, because you have so many fans and people who have like strong opinions on it. And I feel like he was able to thread the needle of appeasing most Batman fans, but also people who don't care about Batman know the movie and like it.
Yeah, that was a
Because,
very difficult job because if you're taking up the cowl like that, it's you sorry, you're set up for failure most of the time,
yeah,
right? You've seen in the past, like we talked about. But
for sure.
so in terms of Christopher Nolan though, Mitch, like what do you think is the overall style? We said high concept. Is there anything else that kind of says like
Um,
Nolan? Because I know there's some shots, like some certain shots I'll get into that
yeah,
I see as
and
Nolan.
I don't know much in terms of like the technical aspects of film. Like I haven't studied film. I'm more just like kind of an on the couch movie watcher. But I would say for him compared to the other ones, I would say he's a bit bold and maybe like aspirational in terms of what he's trying to accomplish in his films, as opposed to a Fincher, who you could maybe say sort of the same thing, but I feel like his movies are a little bit more grounded, Fincher. Like they're a bit more straightforward and are based more just on kind of like human interaction.
Mhm.
Whereas with Nolan, there's usually a larger picture, there's a larger stake throughout his films, like Interstellar or Inception. Where
Yep.
there's kind of like just the kind of regular interaction between people, but then there's also this big sort of storyline and the world's hanging in the balance type
Yeah.
thing. And I guess maybe that's partly why I'm not the biggest Nolan fan. Although again, he's a terrific director. Like
Mm.
it's cutting hairs, but yeah, I guess with his style, it would be like he really sets out to hit a home run kind of with every film. And when you do that, you're going to have some strikeouts, which is fine, you
Yeah,
know?
you're gonna miss. Nobody bats 1,000. There you
Yeah.
go. And but how I see it, like you said, bold. Oh my God, bold. Bold is a big one. Didn't
Yeah.
have enough coffee today. So bold and uh realistic, turning like the high concept into more realistic,
Hmm.
as well as, and when I see for shot wise, one that's like a staple for him is like big establishing shots, like scenery shots. So you see in like The Dark Knight, he's like standing on the building, right? You see this huge wide city shots. The opening one of Dark Knight, you see the huge city shot during the day before the bank robbery. You see Inception, the huge landscapes. Interstellar, every single movie you can kind of point to like huge establishing shots, and that kind of encapsulates the whole like bold, huge, ambitious plan kind of thing.
Hmm.
That's how I kind of see that.
Yeah. I completely agree. But yeah, I mean, is there anything else you'd want to talk about for Nolan? Maybe some of the technical stuff of his film. You kind of went over it, but if there's
Yeah.
anything else.
There's only one other shot I kind of see over and over again in his movies is like a slow dolly shot, like a tracking shot into like the back of a person. Like they're standing and it's like a huge wide scene and they're just standing there. You see the opening scene of like Dark Knight where you have like
Yeah.
the Joker's like minion with holding his mask at the side and it's like tracking into that and like
Well, I think that was the Joker. We just didn't know at the
oh
time.
yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
But we didn't know at the time because we saw all the other people, and then
Mhm.
you see him in like a purple suit with the mask by his side. So I think it did end up being the Joker, but we don't know for sure. So, but yeah, I mean, I feel like we covered Christopher Nolan, so we can go on to the third director so far, and this was the other one I picked. I need to watch more films. First of all, that's one thing. I've seen a good amount. My problem is I don't really like watching movies by myself, which sounds weird. It just feels like a big commitment and I get more bored. Whereas I feel like if I'm in it with someone else, like we're in it together
Yeah.
almost. Like
I get
if
that.
like when we'd be at university, we'd watch movies together, whatever. So I do need to watch more. So I kind of had trouble coming up with a second director. Not that there aren't great directors. It's more just I looked at kind of the films that I really enjoyed and I couldn't quite find one that had multiple ones I liked. And then it hit me Spike Lee. And
Mm.
I thought he was a great one to bring up just because he's so unique and has such a distinct style, like some of the other ones. But I would say him maybe above all in terms of like his movies are his movies. He pretty much does everything
Mm.
like Tarantino. Like those are like his babies, and he hasn't made a ton. He has over a period of time, but
Mhm.
he's not like a director who pumps out like 2 movies a year type thing and delegates everything,
Mhm.
to his
They're
staff.
they're his movies. Like they're called like
Mm,
the term auteur. Like he's the one. It's like the author of the film. It's like you see like a film by Tarantino, a film by Spike Lee. Like they're their movies. No one else really gets credit for the movie because it's like their, like you said, baby. So
yeah.
yeah.
And he finally got an Oscar. Well, let's talk about one of the recent movies he made that probably a decent amount of people saw, which was Black Klansman,
Mhm.
which I love that movie. I
Was
thought
it
it was
really?
really good. It had like I wasn't sure what the reviews were going in, but I kind of went in blind and I just thought it was great. It's so typical Spike Lee, yet it was obviously a new story. And it's just like a very cool story itself, where you have like a black guy, police like detective or whatever he was,
Mhm.
infiltrating the KKK, like during the civil rights era.
Mhm.
And so you'd think, oh, this is like a really serious movie, right? Like very tough to watch. No, like it's quite satisfying and funny, to
Yeah.
watch, even though it does cover a dark subject matter.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I feel like that's what makes Spike Lee so special is like he'll take on these stories because he's obviously a black man and he likes to make stories about kind of black history and the experience of being African American in the US. And one of the only like major directors who's really emphasized that. And I think Black Klansman was just such a good example of that, where it does like obviously Adam Driver was kind of famous from that movie because he was quite funny. And
That
there's
was a
this
big surprise for me. Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but that was a big surprise for me. He was in the movie. I'm like, oh, Kylo Ren. It's Adam
yeah.
Driver.
And there's that scene where they're like on the phone with I forget the guy's name, but he was like the leader of the
Oh,
KKK. And
Topher
they're
Grace was the actor, the guy from that '70s show, right? That was
oh yeah.
yeah,
And he's like pretending to be white on the phone and they're all like huddled around like as they talk to him
and he's like,
and
I'm a
like goad
white
him on.
man, and he's saying stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like,
Yeah. So I thought that was like kind of a really good example. And if you haven't seen it, like check it out. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure if I would just going in because I felt like the reviews were kind of mixed, but no, I thought it was a great movie. And that was the first Oscar Spike Lee had actually won,
oh,
which
an
is
Oscar from that movie. Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, I think it was screenplay, best original screenplay,
Oh, I can see that. Yeah.
which is like crazy, like given the amount of movies he's made and how good they are. But I think with him, and this happens to some other directors, where it's like over time the movie builds in kind of respect and like admiration, where you make a movie in its time and people are kind of and then 20 years later it's like wow that was an incredible movie. Like Shawshank could actually be an example of that,
Mhm.
where it wasn't considered the greatest movie of all time when it came out, but then years and years later, through rewatching it, it's up there, in terms of people's rankings. And part of that is probably to do with the subject matter of Spike Lee's films, where again, like some of them are like he likes to cover those uncomfortable, touchy subjects, And so maybe like in 1992, like the Academy Awards wasn't ready to give
Mhm.
him an Oscar for a movie about Malcolm X, which is my favorite Spike Lee movie that we'll get to. Whereas now, if you watch it, it's just a great movie. Like, because I think that might have to do with why he wasn't getting the recognition he deserved, because
Mhm.
Malcolm X is a bit of a controversial figure.
Yeah, I haven't seen that film actually. Malcolm X. I'll add to my list actually right now.
Yeah, and that was the one that kind of set me over the top in terms of like really liking Spike Lee because I hadn't really heard much about the movie Malcolm X. I don't think it's like super popular. And again, probably because like it's about Malcolm X, who is seemingly like this controversial figure, even though if you do more like research on him, he actually was like not really that controversial. He's kind of made to be a villain like in the media and that because of
Mhm.
the time period in like the 60s and his affiliation with the Nation of Islam. So I guess that's probably why like a lot of white people didn't see it back then. But it's a great movie. Like I highly recommend it. It's very long. It's over 3 hours actually.
Over 3 hours. Oh my God.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel that now you might want to take a break halfway through. But it doesn't feel that long because it's almost like 3 movies in one. The 3 acts I found were quite like rigid, like you could really tell what the three
Mhm.
acts were, and they all have kind of a different tone to them. So in the first act, you have the guy before he becomes Malcolm X. So his
Origins.
origin, like as a kid, and then all the way up to like kind of a young adult. And Spike Lee's in the movie, and he's friends with Malcolm X before he's Malcolm X.
Oh, cool.
And there, that part of the movie, like that 1 hour. Now, there's some very sad parts, like about like when he was a kid and everything. But a lot of it is kind of like just a fun, almost buddy type movie of him and Spike Lee kind of going around doing little tricks, sort of trying to get some money
Like
and
a
that sort
coming
of
of
thing.
age kind of thing
Yeah,
in the town. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So it's cool because it's not just like a super heavy 3 hours, right? Even though there are parts that are for sure. And then act two, I would say, was when he goes to prison.
Mhm.
And that's when, what are you going to do in prison? He just reads and he converts to Islam, like becomes Muslim, and
Mhm.
then like reads a lot of like Black history type text. And that's what kind of inspires him. And then part three is like he's Malcolm X. He's out of prison and he's starting to become like a civil rights activist and everything. And then it also goes in kind of, I don't remember it exactly. I watched it a couple years ago, how they cover the end, because who killed him is still kind of up for debate.
Oh, so he could
There
he took
were
a
people
liberty with what
arrested.
happened. Mhm.
Yeah, like there were people who were arrested. So he was part of the Nation of Islam. And then he left to do his own thing. Like they were a very powerful organization. Um, and so, and then that's one of the famous shots of the movie, which is the dolly shot that Spike Lee uses a ton.
Mhm.
And it's also like he'll have the character almost like spinning as he does it. And you see it like zoom in on Denzel Washington's face because it's right as everything's circling because he was getting like I mean, he was obviously getting targeted by just like white people, like racist white people, the cops, and the Nation of Islam. So you had all these different groups basically wanting his head, right?
Mhm.
And like right at the end, when they do that scene, that's when he kind of realizes, you know, the end is probably near. And then he was killed at like some sort of like speaking engagement, like a rally or something. But the people who were actually arrested were like acquitted a couple years ago
Oh
because
wow.
of a documentary that came out on Netflix. So it's
They
still
got
not 100% confirmed who killed Malcolm X.
they got their names cleared from a Netflix documentary.
Well, the Netflix documentary brought up like all these facts that were just ignored because the
Oh, okay. Yeah.
investigation was 50 years ago.
Mm. Mm.
So the like Manhattan police, whatever it was, district reopened the case and found that there like wasn't evidence to convict the people who killed him. And the people who arrested were from the Nation of Islam, but yeah, they were some of them at least were acquitted. So still unsure, but the film itself, like honestly, I'd put like my top two or three movies of all
Wow.
time. Like
Okay.
I thought it was great.
So I've added it because I haven't seen it, but I've heard the history a little bit because I know I was talking to Al about it. He was mentioning Malcolm X, and so I
Mhm.
didn't know too much about the history, so I was looking more into it. But I didn't know Spike Lee made a movie. I
Yeah.
didn't know because I don't know Spike Lee that well. I know
Mhm.
Black Klansman and one he did called The Inside Man,
Yeah.
and that was it. But in terms of well, you're saying there's like three different movies there, but in terms of the tone of kind of Spike Lee's movies overall, because I know you said there was different tones, but if there's like a certain style or a certain like feeling he has in his films, like we kind of painted a broad brush with Nolan. But what do you feel Spike Lee does? Like what feeling does he kind of give?
I would say like one of the big things in his films is like he'll make you uncomfortable on purpose. Particularly, obviously, like we're white, so when we watch it, it's going to be different than like a black person watching the movie. But he'll also like include humor within the film a lot of the time, even in serious parts, and that kind of puts you at ease. You know what I
But
mean?
it's done tastefully, right? Like a little like peppering
Yeah.
in humor. Because sometimes I see people put in like they put a like kind of I would say like goofy humor in spots that
Mhm.
they tried what Spike Lee does, but he does it kind of tastefully, right?
His humor is like real life humor, like stuff that
Mm.
would happen in real life, as opposed to like a joke where at the end they like play the drums like cha like it's
Yeah,
like
like
actual
over
just
the top.
like regular people, like it's comedy within life, if you will.
Mhm.
So I guess for like the tone of his films, they're usually, I would say he has a message usually in his films. That's one thing.
Mhm.
He typically has like an overall message he's trying to deliver. um And I guess like when I think of like Malcolm X, part of it is also just like making like changing the person kind of telling the story, if you will. Because like Malcolm X was considered like a villain by a lot of people, by a lot of white people for the last however long, and even still today. But if you look at a lot of the things he wanted, they were pretty much the same as Martin Luther King. Like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were pretty much the same in terms of like what they wanted, like like liberation and that. Yet the media, especially now, has taken Martin Luther King and made him just like this sort of teddy bear figure,
Mhm.
even though he was more like serious and had stronger demands. And then Malcolm X was made the villain. So I guess like making a movie like that, making a movie like Black Klansman, where you're making a movie about the KKK, but it's really about this like young black detective who's able to uncover a lot of stuff
Mhm.
and get a lot of them put in jail, right? So he has usually a message he wants to send, and he also like changes who the hero is from history. Not that it's fiction, it's just a different
It's
perspective.
like shining a light on
Yeah.
like an unheard perspective.
Yeah, which is great because obviously like there's a ton of white directors. It's good to have like kind of a different voice, like just more
Mhm.
people at the table to make films. But yeah, I still need to watch more movies from Spike Lee. I need to watch more movies in general, but from the couple I've seen, they have left a mark where I thought they were really cool. And I really enjoyed them. But let's get to probably the biggest director of all time. Is he your favorite director?
I'd say he's my favorite director. I've said it
All right.
before. I'll stand by it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last director we will cover is Steven Spielberg, and I will let you cook, Alex.
Perfect. So Steven Spielberg, again, one of my favorite directors of all time. I'd say growing up, I didn't realize these were the movies I was watching, and I was exposed to these, and I didn't clue in, and it was like these specific movies because they all had very similar tones. I didn't clue until later, but like you said, Mitch, like he's been directing for what, 50 years
Yeah.
ish, close
Well,
to that.
Jaws was like the early 70s, right?
Yeah,
Or
Jaws
something.
was 75. Yeah, so it was is one of those things where I kind of split up his films into eras, if you will, because I found some movies like differed in tone
Mm-hmm.
as Spielberg matured and he explored different things in his past and his life. He's you can see it in his movies. So at the very beginning, I don't know about I say the first era, it was before Jaws when he did some short films and some other like lower budget films. So Fireflight, Firelight, Duel, and the Sugarland Express. Those are films that don't really like stand out as
Mm-hmm.
his. I haven't seen them personally. I just know like those are some of his first films he did. And the one that put him on the map was Jaws. So
Mm-hmm.
that was the one I'd say like the second era and the one people know most about Spielberg was the like mid 70s to I'd say the late 80s. So you get Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1941, which was actually like a really big failure for him actually.
Mm-hmm.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. So you get the Indiana Jones trilogy within that era. E.T., The Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, Always, and Hook. I think Hook was the last part of it. That was like, and what I see in this era was a very like, if I can put Spielberg's kind of tone into one word, I'd say like lovable charm. I say in that era you have like so again Raiders of the Lost Ark. So Indiana Jones, one of the biggest like franchises of all time. It had some serious things about there was the Nazis trying to uncover huge like artifacts that can like turn the tides of the war, right, and help
Mm-hmm.
the Nazi war machine. But Indiana Jones stopped them. So it's very intense themes, but it's so it's very charming in the sense it's a callback to the 1930s and 20s serialized adventure like shows or like the
Mm-hmm.
radio shows where it's like tune in to the next adventure of like kind of like the Lone Ranger. So it was very inspired by uh serialized very like adventure films, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a call love letter to the past in a sense.
Yeah.
And then you get these so you have those ET was something about his childhood. It was relating to his childhood in suburban California. He was in California, yeah. And again, very charming classic Spielberg. And then you get some more serious films by him. So Empire of the Sun near the end of that was a very serious movie. I haven't seen it though. I've heard about Japanese internment. No, sorry, the World War II camp, uh,
Mhm.
a prison camp in Japan.
Okay.
Christian Bale was in that movie. That was his first movie. He was very young.
Oh.
He was a kid. I can't remember how old he was in that.
Hmm.
And so I say that's the era people know most about. And then my favorite is his next kind of era from like the early 90s to the mid 2000s,
Mhm.
which is a little more serious tone. You have Jurassic Park 1 and 2, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, uh, AI, Minority Report, Catch Me If You Can, and The Terminal.
Mhm.
So I haven't out of those that list, I haven't seen AI.
Yeah.
That's one I have to see. But with that, it takes on a little darker tone. Like Mitch, have you seen any of like what movies have you seen in that
Of
era?
that group, I've seen Jurassic Park. Let me
Mhm.
just move my screen around. I've seen Jurassic Park. I have
Mhm.
seen Saving Private Ryan. I need to watch Catch Me If You Can. I don't know why I haven't
That's a great
already.
movie. Yeah.
I haven't seen Schindler's List. I could watch that. With those movies, it's just like it's tough to get yourself to watch them just because you know they're so sad, you know? Like,
Schindler's List is a once like you like it is not a feel good movie. So
yeah, and
yeah.
that's the thing. Not that they aren't great and that like they shouldn't be made. It's just like it's tough to get yourself to be like, oh, like I want to watch Schindler's List tonight. You know, like
Yeah, you're like it's not
it's
you're
like
like, yeah, let's watch. Yeah, exactly.
do I want to feel like extreme sadness?
Mhm.
But no, I know it's a great film. Like I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, Catch Me If You Can is one I'm not totally sure why I haven't seen. I mean, it seems right up my alley. Like obviously, like not
Mhm.
that I'm, yeah, like a con man right up my alley, but just like Leo DiCaprio, Tom Hanks, kind of a like a mystery type movie, obviously.
Yeah, I'd say it's a cat and mouse game.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
that's a better way to describe it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I see what you mean, like where that would be your favorite. Also, I feel like those movies are a bit more like they feel a bit more modern, you know, when
Mhm.
you watch them. Like Catch Me If You Can doesn't feel that dated, like if you were to watch it now, given the cast. Saving Private Ryan, Jurassic Park, even. Whereas like the era two, while also great, if you watch Jaws, you know it's from a long time
You
ago,
can tell
you
it's
know.
dated. Yeah.
Yeah, same with like E.T.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and then looking at the note here, like era four, which is like 21st century, I feel like he just looking at the list, to me, it seems like he wanted to make a bit more not serious, but maybe not the giant blockbusters he was making in like era two,
Mhm.
um, and maybe even era three. Like you've got some movies in there I don't even recognize, and then some I recognize, and they're more of sort of the like story driven movie as opposed to sort of an effects or some sort of like where there's a big thing to kind of draw in the audience. It's more just based on the
Mhm.
script and the acting.
Yeah, there's not
um
like a big shtick. Like Jaws was
yeah,
like, oh, kill a
yeah.
shark, right?
Or
Indiana
like
Jones, yeah,
ET, even though there's
adventures.
a lot of heart in it, like there's obviously something strange that's gonna get people involved. Jurassic
Mhm.
Park, kind of the same thing, right? It's kind of crazy, the dinosaurs and all that. Whereas with these movies, I would say the biggest one of these would probably be War Horse, maybe,
Mhm.
because it won the Oscar, I think, and it was did pretty well commercially. And then Ready Player One, like that's a funny one that he made because he would have been pretty old when he made it, and it's like a book adaptation of like a video game sort of thing, and then you're in the
Yeah.
fake world, and like it's.
And it's like a love letter to 80s video games too, though, because it had a lot of
Mm,
like lore that the character had to figure out these clues about like old 80s pop culture kind of things. So
mhm.
that's kind of cool. Love letter to Spielberg.
Yeah. And then you have like Lincoln. I didn't see it. Obviously, it's about Abraham Lincoln.
Mhm.
West Side Story was a remake. I don't think people
It
liked
didn't
it
do well in the
a
box
ton.
office. No, I didn't see it. Yeah.
Part of it also though was like I think they made the movie and then one of like the lead actors, like a lot of stuff came out about him that was not very
Yeah,
good. So
Ansel
that
Elgort, I
probably
think
had
is his.
something to do with it.
Mhm.
Um, but also like with any remake, it's tough. Um, so yeah, but I guess looking at those eras, I'd probably agree. Like, in the combination of like big movie but also good movie, I would say era three would also probably be my favorite because
Mhm.
era two is kind of 70s, like early 80s. But he's definitely one of the most significant, maybe the most significant in terms of. box office like money,
Mhm.
would he be second? I think James Cameron's first
James
because of
Cameron,
Avatar and Titanic.
yeah, James Cameron's the first. I think
I'll
he
look it
may be
up.
up there. Him and Scorsese, in terms of like skill and like box office draw, I think they're very close. Uh, I couldn't tell you though, but in terms of how many movies he's made and how popular, like Spielberg's a household name, he's,
Mhm.
I'm sure he's raked in a lot of money for Hollywood. So,
Yeah, I'm looking at the list right now. And that's a good point you made where there's like skill and being able to get people to come to watch the movie
mm,
because like James Cameron, so I'm looking at the list right now. Spielberg's actually first.
yeah,
And I feel like a lot of that, and it's not to take away, it's an incredible accomplishment, is he's made a lot of movies,
yeah.
you know,
Mm.
and a lot of good ones. That's why you don't get to there by holy smokes by
I'm the same way, man.
making
Sometimes
bad movies.
you don't fail upwards, right? You gotta
Yeah.
make good movies and keep going.
So I'm not trying to disrespect him, but I do think that's probably a big factor. Is he's made a lot of them, right? Compared to some other directors who've only made like eight or
Yeah.
10 movies, maybe.
And
So I'm
with
looking
that,
at
you get skills. Like you keep building
mhm.
your skill with every movie you make, right? So,
Yeah, so like Scorsese's not in the top 10, which I'm not surprised by because he's made like big movies in terms of critically big and that a good amount of people have seen,
mhm,
but he doesn't have any movies, maybe Wolf of Wall Street, but I'm not even sure of that, where it got to that like everyone, almost everyone seemingly has watched it or knows about it.
because
And
they
I'm
weren't
looking,
made for. Oh, sorry, they weren't made for everybody, right? They're very
mhm,
mature films for like Scorsese, and sometimes like gruesome in some senses, right?
for
Um,
sure.
because the
Like,
mobster movies, right, where Spielberg has like the family films, and he
mhm,
really actually wrote an essay about this. He had a very full like he's the emotional director. People call him.
mhm,
Not that he's emotional, but he plays on people's emotions, and you get the whole. You see a lot of family dynamics in his films,
yeah,
which draws everybody, right? So.
for sure. And I'm just looking at the top 10. This is according to Wikipedia. So James Cameron was second. Now he has some monsters like
Mhm.
Titanic and the Avatar movies. But then you look at some of the other directors on this list, and it is kind of like they kind of make like the really big sort of commercial type movies. Like number three is the Russo brothers, who did a lot of Marvel movies.
Yeah,
So yeah, that makes sense. Peter Jackson, the Lord of the Rings movies were his biggest,
true.
I
King
think.
Kong and stuff too. I remember that.
Yeah. Michael Bay, who's makes terrible movies.
Special effects, just like
Yeah, like his
dreamland,
biggest
I'd
movies are
say.
the Transformer movies, which yeah.
I say McDonald's of film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David Yates.
Oh,
I hadn't heard of him, but he
he
did
did
the
Harry
Harry
Potter.
Potter.
He
Yeah.
did the last four Harry Potter movies and the
And then
Fantastic Beasts.
Christopher Nolan is seven. That's pretty impressive.
Mm.
Because other than the Batman movies, you wouldn't really say he's done any like clear corporate, not corporate, but just like commercial type movies,
Mhm.
that are guaranteed to hit in the box office. But yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, Spielberg, if you were to make a graph of like most commercial success in terms of like theater grossing money, like how much the film grosses compared to like quality of film, he probably would be in the highest like quadrant of that graph.
So on that list, who was number one? Was it Spielberg?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Figured.
And again, I think that's probably largely because of the amount of movies he's
Yeah.
made.
Mhm.
And he's made a lot of like big blockbuster hits, but I do think it's probably significant the
Mhm.
number that he's made as well. And then is there anything else you wanted to touch on for Spielberg?
No, I just say that era, like there's a few films like his beginning, like Indiana Jones, Jaws, E.T. Those are like, well, Indiana Jones is three. Those five movies were the big ones from that era, and then era three, I'd say, where he's a little more mature and has more experience under his belt. That's where
Mm-hmm.
he flourishes. That's like I think are my favorite movies there.
Yep.
And overall, like if we had to paint a tone for him, I'd say emotional heartstring tugger. He
Mm-hmm.
just pulls on the heartstrings, and he's a very emotional filmmaker, and that's why people are I think are drawn because films are supposed to make you feel things, right? And so if they make you
For sure.
feel good, and also not only does like even in his like dark movies and intense,
Mm-hmm.
you have moments of like lighthearted humor, kind of like Spike Lee, and you
Yeah.
see a little bit of like it's just human interaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get natural a little bits of comedy here and there or like lightheartedness in like the darker movies.
for sure. And I guess maybe just to wrap up, we could maybe just name our favorite movie from each director.
Mm,
So let's start with Spike.
yeah,
What would be your favorite Spike Lee movie?
Black Klansman.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say
I
that.
was thinking you were going to say that.
Yeah.
For me, it would be Malcolm X. Like I mentioned, one of my favorite movies of all
Mhm.
time. And I wasn't expecting it going in. I just thought, well, Denzel's in it. I love Denzel. Spike Lee's pretty cool. I'll check it out. And Denzel is just incredible in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, my God, like it'd be hard for me to find a movie I didn't like that Denzel was in, but I think that and Training Day were his
Yeah.
two best performances, in my opinion,
Yeah.
and completely different. Like a lot of people say he's the same character in every movie, and I understand that to an extent because I think he just has this charisma to him that is so overpowering,
Hmm.
but I think he's able to harness it in different ways where it's not the exact same. It's not like Vince Vaughn or something, an actor like that. Like,
Hmm.
even though yes, he's pretty much always a powerful character because that's just who he is. He's too cool. He's too
Yeah.
like strong of a person, like personality
It's too
where
suave
he's
in
not
times too.
he's
Yeah.
not going to be able to play some like loser like whatever like kind of like a weak character. But yeah, that's definitely probably my favorite performance of his.
Mm.
All right, let's go Christopher Nolan. I'm curious because I don't know which your favorite Nolan movie is.
This is a very tough one. I love World War II history. I love like Dunkirk. I love the
Mhm.
movie, but I have to say, in terms of introducing me into Nolan, the high concept, I like Inception.
Oh yeah.
Dark Knight, Inception. Dark Knight is probably one of my favorite movies, but
Hmm.
I might have to say Inception, just for the
Yeah,
sake of disagreeing with you, Mitch.
sure.
Dark Knight.
No, perfect. Yeah, for me, I'd have to go Dark Knight.
Yeah.
I've mentioned it before. I am a like big Batman fan, so I'm a bit biased, but I also just enjoyed it the most, like for sure, like
Mhm.
quite easily. I haven't seen Dunkirk. I know it's a very good war movie. I'm not the biggest fan of war movie, just the genre in general. Just because I find them a little bit repetitive, like it's kind of like you've seen one, you've seen most of the others, but I should check it out because I do know it's very it was considered like a great movie. Like it was nominated for a lot of Oscars, and I know a lot of like World War II vets thought it was quite accurate compared to some of the other movies about that war. But yeah, for me, I'm going Dark Knight.
Mhm.
Iconic performance from Heath Ledger,
Yeah.
the best superhero movie of all time. I would barely even call it a superhero movie. It's like a Greek tragedy. We like talked about it in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
drama class in grade 12, how like Harvey Dent was like hubris or whatever and that. But yeah, just a really great movie. And the problem with Dark Knight is like it's one of my favorite movies of all time. Yet I would probably agree that it's overrated because too many people have it so high.
It has become over because it's just so popular, and like even though
Yeah.
it's a really good movie and it's so popular,
Hmm.
it's yeah, it's become overrated, but it's not. Yeah, it's a great
Like
movie. That's all I can
like
say.
I'm able to, and I think you're the same. I'm able to decipher between my favorite and what's like the best. Whereas some
Mm,
people don't do that. They just think their opinion is like superior or whatever. So like to me, Dark Knight's in my top 5 favorite movies. I
mm.
don't think it's a top 50 movie of all time necessarily. I don't know. Like it's debatable, obviously.
I'd
But
say
if
it
you
might crack top 50, but yes, yes,
but if
that's
you look at like
debatable.
the IMDb, it's like number 2, right? Which
Oh
is like
yeah,
easy now,
yeah, yeah.
easy now.
We'll pump the brakes there.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's still a great movie, and it's not the movie's fault that people kind of have gone a bit too far
No.
with the acclaim. So for David Fincher, you mentioned you wanted to watch more movies, but you've seen a good number.
I've seen a good
Um,
number, yeah.
for
Mm.
me, I would say my favorite film is Social Network, but maybe my favorite thing he's ever done might be Mindhunter. Honestly, it's one of my favorite
Mm.
shows. It's too bad they're not doing a third season, but I'll get over it.
Yeah, I might say for mine. Oh, Mindhunter, I have to check out. That's one. I know Chase has been telling me about that too. We'll get
Mm-hmm.
him on the podcast. Our buddy Chase, he'll come on soon.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say my favorite. It's a coin toss between Fight Club and Zodiac for me. But I might have to give the edge to Zodiac.
Mm.
because I love the whole, this is Jake Gyllenhaal. He's hunting down this serial killer on his own in a sense, but he's like not literally hunting it down, but just piecing together information. He's trying to track him down, I guess.
Hmm.
But
And a great
it's
cast.
great cast, a great performance, right? It just shows a guy
Hmm.
spiraling into obsession about this killer who hasn't been caught to this day, right? So we don't
Hmm.
know what happened to him. So that I think
Which
that's what
is,
gives it like that mystery, like you said. It was like like with
yeah.
Malcolm X, it was like there's some history that still needs to be like uncovered. Same thing
Hmm.
with this Zodiac, like because we don't know and it's a big mystery. I think that's a draw for people, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah,
Zodiac killer. So how are they going to end it? Like, what's going to happen? That's my mentality when I went into it. So,
for sure. Definitely a great film, great cast. And I guess we'll just get to our last director.
mm-hmm.
Your favorite director, Steven Spielberg. I'll say mine first. Let me look at the list just to make sure I don't I don't miss one. I have one in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure. I'm gonna go with one, and I didn't think I would like it, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park.
I
Yeah.
hadn't seen it until we went to our friend Megan, who was on the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
birthday party, remember? And we went to the movie theater. Like we were able to rent out the whole movie theater to watch Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Because that was like kind of during COVID. So it was much cheaper. You could just rent out the whole movie theater, and they had like a list of movies that were on there. Speaking of which, I would love to be able to do that again, but the problem is they're too expensive, and
Mm-hmm.
watch like all these movies that were ahead of our time or that I just didn't get to see in theater and watching like can you imagine watching The Dark Knight in theater? Come
Yeah.
on.
I
That would
watched
be incredible.
Pulp Fiction in the theater with Al like 2 years ago.
That would be awesome
So that
too.
was really cool.
I guess I just need to like keep my eye out, but also like it is nice to be at like a big kind of comfortable theater as opposed to I feel like the theaters that put on those old movies are like the tiny old ones with like wooden chairs and
Yeah.
that, but that's all right. It's
The
great
charm to it.
having
Yeah.
independent small
Yeah.
theaters, but yeah, I'll go with Jaws. I wouldn't say it's like my favorite movie of all
Oh,
time, but I enjoyed it way more than I thought, and it
yeah.
was quite compelling.
And about Jaws too, like something
Or sorry, did I say Jaws?
you said Jaws, yeah.
I,
You
I
meant
meant
Jurassic
Jurassic
Park.
Park. I meant Jurassic Park.
I
I
was like,
think I said
oh, I was about to be like, yeah, okay, Mitch. Yeah.
I think I said Jurassic Park originally, and then I was looking at the note, and I was just looking at Jaws, so I read it aloud. But yeah,
Yeah.
Jurassic Park.
It's a
Jurassic Park.
great performance by the veteran fisherman in that film. And we can talk about another time, but that was a really good
Mm-hmm.
film. This is very, very hard to narrow it down to one. Because he has so many different kind of like different styles in the over his like eras, but I might have to say Jurassic Park's up there, man. I don't know. I maybe
Answer the
answer the
question.
question. uh
Five, four, three, two,
Saving Private Ryan.
one. Saving
Saving
Private
Private
Ryan.
Ryan.
There you go.
Putting me
That's
under the
another.
pressure, the timer there. Yeah.
Mhm. Did they do a remake of that? I thought. I guess not. Maybe I just mix up Saving
Mm-hmm.
Private Ryan and Dunkirk or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, they no, the Saving Private Ryan was. I think it still stands the test of time, like you were saying before. It doesn't feel dated. It's because these practical effects and not special
Hmm.
effects. So like that will always stand like better the
Yeah.
test of time. And another funny thing was, like Matt Damon was Private Ryan.
Okay.
What happened was they made everybody in the cast go through basic training
Hmm.
except Matt Damon, so they would
Hmm.
actually build up a resentment for him
Yeah.
naturally. So in the movie they would actually resent him. So that's a cool thing Spielberg did. That's why
Yeah, I
he's the
saw
goat,
that
man. He's great.
somewhere. That's a very funny tactic, and you can definitely see that happening where the guys are all like the cast are all doing the training, and they're like, "Why the fuck isn't Damon here?" And then like even if they know it's a bit, you'd still be annoyed. You'd
Oh
still
yeah,
be annoyed. You'd be like,
100%.
"Fuck this guy." But yeah, that's the perfect way to end it. Spielberg, an iconic director. All right, Alex, we'll leave it there. If you enjoyed the video, remember to give us a like and subscribe and check us out on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at Podcast M&M. Save it for the podcast.
Save
That's
it.
perfect. What you're
I'll save
talking
that. I'll
about.
save
That is
that. Yeah.
absolutely perfect.